7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Howdy, CROC Nation. Dr. Tommy and Ellie here with another CROC podcast. Joining me, as always, my faithful aide and valet, Angel Santana. Have faith, let it begin. Angel, how are you, my friend?
I feel as if we haven't spoken in a long time, even though we see each other. But you know what? What brings us together is another episode of the CROC podcast.
Indeed. And, and that's shame on us, We went out to dinner maybe about 6 weeks ago and had such a beautiful, productive dinner with our friend Nick and with Rod. We had such a good dinner. And we're having another board meeting, I think, in 2 weeks, my friend.
I'm counting down, man. I'm already, I think I'm going to start fasting.
So, Angel, I think I'm going to do the unspeakable today. I hope I don't alienate any of our amazing survivor thrivers with our subject matter tonight. It is controversial, and it is something which I doubt many of our listeners would think I'm capable of. And I, with all of that intrigue and all of that introduction, let's get right into it. What do you say?
I'm at the edge of my seat, my friend. Let's go.
Yep. So the name of tonight's podcast, or for the podcast for this week, is Please Don't Get Kicked Out of the Practice. So it's a podcast about changing our lens. Instead of being always from the lens of the patient, today we're going to change the lens to the perspective of the oncologist or the doctors and the nurses that take care of you all out there. And there are times, believe it or not, and this is where the paradoxes start, where you guys misbehave, believe it or not, our beloved survivor thrivers. There are times, and there are some of you that misbehave to such a degree that you get yourself, like if you were playing football, you would get the flag. If you were playing hockey, you would go to the penalty box. If you were playing baseball, the umpire would throw you out of the game. And basically, there are circumstances when that needs to happen. And Angel, before we even start, right? So not Dr. E, right?
I'm like, I'm exactly. There you go.
You have no words.
Nope.
All right. Well, let's start with that. Actually, that's a really good place to start, because this is a podcast today of paradoxes. So the first question that you guys will ask me, and I know you will because I asked myself the question, is paradox number one. Hey, E, how can such a self-proclaimed survivor thriver advocate kick people out of your practice? We thought you said cancer survivor thrivers could do no wrong. So that's question number one. Question number two is, hey, E, why now? You've been doing this for 35 years. Why are you starting to kick people out of your practice now when you never kicked anybody out of your practice ever before? Now you're starting to kick people out of the practice. Are you getting old? Are you getting cranky? Are you getting crunchy? What's going on with you? So that's paradox number two. Paradox number three. Don't our survivor thrivers have enough to worry about without having yet another responsibility placed on their plate? That's question number three. So I'm hoping, Angel, that you and I will be able to, bring everything full circle and answer these questions. And perhaps maybe even some of our survivor thrivers will agree with us.
Totally understand.
Yeah. So my reply is that there are certain circumstances that not just require a talk, that, okay, Dad, oh, the principal wants me in his office, or what my father used to do, a swift kick in the butt, but a substantial and immediate expulsion from the practice. So there's those circumstances where there is the zero tolerance. There also are great saves. So there are times when if we pull the trigger too soon, we will lose some patients that we could have otherwise turned around. And we're going to talk about that as well. So the zero tolerance group, Angel, what would be the first thing? I don't want to sound like we're playing Family Feud, but what would be the first thing that you would think of that would like earn you, a trip out of the practice?
Um, Unprofessionalism.
You know what? That's a really good one, but that's not even number one. The number one answer to that question is safety. So if there is a person, a patient, a survivor, thriver who poses a threat to themselves or to others, that would be instant expulsion. Number two, would be the non-compliant patient. And I actually have a lot of non-compliant patients, some of whom are the sweetest, most lovable people you'll ever want to meet, but they don't do one thing we tell them to do. But if they continue to do it, I call it serial non-compliance, where they're putting their health at risk. Then that would be another zero tolerance group of expulsion. Number three would be in circumstances where the relationship between the oncologist or the nurse or the oncology team with the survivor thriver becomes not only unhealthy, but non-therapeutic, where it's just very unhealthy for everybody, and it's just not working, then expulsion or removal from the practice would be indicated. Number four, if you have a patient with significant philosophical incompatibilities or reality disconnect, so these are the patients that we talk about us having what's called circular conversations where and it's not just the doctor or the nurse, being rushed or, just not being clear, but being super unrushed and being super, super clear. And the patient just isn't getting it and it's just not working. Or if the patient, I had a patient who was a big conspiracy theorist, who just thought everybody was out to kill him, including all of us, then or a patient who thought that actually all doctors and drug companies are corrupt and those types of things where their philosophical conspiracies or whatever might not align with being a good fit for the practice. And then there's those Angel, the dishonest people. There are people out there who just go to doctors to try to sue them. If the doctor talks to them the wrong way, or if they feel that they ordered the wrong test, even if they didn't, they would be very, very, very excited to be able to sue the doctor. And I had a couple of patients like that. Also, patients that are unstable would be another group of people that you might want to consider parting ways with. And then, of course, you have what's called the malignant narcissist. These are the patients that don't take any accountability for their actions. They don't really care about anyone but themselves. They're very irresponsible and they're very disrespectful. And you also have a group of patients that are just angry and unrealistic. And those are another group of people that would warrant being dismissed from the practice. But let's talk about, Angel, the great saves. The great saves are the patients that basically start out expressing signs of incompatibility that we can turn around. These are patients that might, absolutely start and you might think, this just isn't going to work out. It's a really bad, situation. But then you sit down with them and you create boundaries and you explain things to them. And all of a sudden, these lions turn into lambs. And this is a really wonderful group of patients because I take a lot of pride in this circumstance or in this category. And basically, if you approach them in a very mature and non-reactive way, but with boundaries, and set your discussions and your limits, there will be a high percentage of patients that you could actually turn them around. So let's talk a little bit about also, Angel, what I call the caveat. So the caveat is, I want to make sure, I guess you would call it a disclaimer. So there are doctors out there who are, I call them the overreactors. There's one particular large practice that behaves this way. So say, you're a patient of this particular practice and you have an appointment with Dr. X and you're on your way to Dr. X and there's a huge accident on Route 84 and you just, get there really, really, really late. All of a sudden, you do that twice they kick you out of the practice. I think that's overreacting, and it makes it so, it takes the heart out. And we're talking about a subject where you would think there's no heart, but you really have to have a heart. So I call them the overreactors. You're going to lose a lot of great saves if you're that rigid and you act that way. Pain services, people that take care of patients in chronic pain. Now, granted, pain patients can be very challenging because there are people who are truly in chronic pain, and an Angel, you could certainly understand that. And there are people that are manipulators and they just want drugs and they, whatever. So the pain services are very, very super strict, and perhaps they have to be. But I've had interactions with pain services where cancer survivors that were in a lot of pain, and they were, in the palliative care stage of their cancer, and they were talking about drug contracts, and they needed medication renewals earlier than they should have by a few days. And I think that they're losing the overall picture. And I noticed that a lot of pain clinics kind of respond too rigidly, and you lose a lot of saves that you could have ordinarily had. And then I call another group of people, I already talked about the overreactors, but there's what I call the stewardess phenomenon. So when the terrorist attack, God bless this great country, happened in whenever it was it 1999 or 2001, September 11th, 2001, the entire airline industry changed. And before, you could actually talk to a stewardess or a steward, and you could actually make a complaint or voice a disagreement, or you could actually be a human being. After 9/11, you really can't even talk to a stewardess. You can't really, you can say, hey, I'll have a Coca-Cola, but you can't say, excuse me, ma'am, this man in front of me's chair is down to whatever, or I'm displeased with, this or that, because they can basically get you kicked off that plane, and they can overreact. And I've seen it. I've been on enough planes where I've seen people just being very honest and being very appropriate with a complaint. And I've seen them, the stewardesses just absolutely threaten to kick them off the plane. And it makes you feel like you're a prisoner. And I think that the stewardess phenomenon is incredibly apparent in some practices when people do get asked to leave the practice. I think it's an overreaction at times. And what I really meant to say was that the number one caveat I should have started with is that Angel and I are assuming that you're happy with your doctor or your medical team, with your oncology team, that you actually have a good fit and you actually feel you're getting good care and you have a great team giving you what you need and giving you what you deserve. So I should have said that first. So, obviously, if you're in a situation where you're just not feeling it and you miss an appointment because you just have no interest in going back to that doctor, that wouldn't be my recommendation on how to comport yourself. But at the same time, that this is not what this podcast is about. It's about the cancer survivor thriver who's very happy, who has a great team, and there are certain behaviors that we're going to talk about tonight. I'd like to start, Angel, talking about 3 great saves. So there are 3 guys that I had in my practice, that I still have in my practice. So I didn't pick them out of the practice, but I may have had it been another practice. So one gentleman actually threatened to me by saying that if I didn't cure him of his cancer, if he was going to die of his cancer, he was going to take me out. So ordinarily you would say, well, that's a safety issue. And of course, that's like a red freaking flag, right? With fireworks and the whole thing. But there was something about this guy that made me continue the conversation and not just stop the conversation, walk out and call it code gray. So what I did was I started to get to know him a little bit, because he didn't have, he didn't do it in an angry way. It was kind of a matter of fact kind of way. And as it turns out, the guy was abandoned, grew up on the streets. He was an orphan, grew up on the streets, was kicked around from orphanage to orphanage, foster home to foster home, had a really tough life. got caught up in crime, did some really horrible, bad things, started to settle down, had two sons. Both of his sons died of heroin overdoses. And he recovered from that, and he was just finally back. He found another woman, had got married, and has two beautiful young girls that he's raising. And I think that when I heard this story, I kind of and his level of comprehension wasn't very, very high. So when I heard about his life of violence and what he grew up in, and how he really, the way his mind works, it made sense to me that if finally, he finally has a reason to live, and if anybody tries to take that away from him, he's not going to be happy. So he was kind of saying that, but he was saying that in his way, which was, "Hey doc, if I'm not cured of this, then I'm I'm going to take you with me." I don't think, even to this day, I don't think he was saying that. I think, and when I actually called him on it, I said, "Listen, I got to be honest with you. You know, threatening me is pretty, anyone else who would have threatened me would be out of this hospital right now, and you would never be able to come back. But you're different, and I feel something in you, and I feel a strength in you, and I feel such a sorrow in you, and I feel such a hurt in you. And I feel that you've been through so much that I do want to give you a chance. However, if you ever threaten me again, you're gone." And we've become, I don't want to say we become friends, but we certainly enjoy each other when we see each other on visitation. So that was probably my greatest save. Then you have the people that are kind of nasty when they start. They may be just nasty survivor thrivers. I hate to say it, guys, there's some of you guys out there who are just not that nice, maybe. And there were two of them that started that way. One of them actually isn't that nice, but I was able to turn him around. He pretty much alienated every single person in the department, and they basically made me go give him the come to Jesus talk. And he was able to, he was an old law enforcement guy. So, he was kind of a rough and tumble kind of guy, but I was able to settle him down, and he became a lamb. And another really sweet guy who just was scared and in pain, and he was snapping at people and just not treating people nicely. And my nurse practitioners refused to see him and the whole thing. And I sat him down and I read him the Come to Jesus talk. And he turned out to be the sweetest, most wonderful young man, and I'm pulling for him. And, so I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a story about three really great saves. But let's go through, Angel. Did you have any comments before we go through the categories again?
I just think it's amazing how, even though, you and I have different careers, we have the same similarities. You deal with the patients on an ongoing basis, and I could deal with a phone call that can last 28 seconds, but will just put me on a huge anger, or maybe the best call of the week.
Yeah. So, let's actually start with obviously the number one, right? That's the safety issue. So I've had two patients that, well, besides the guy we just talked about, that have threatened me directly. So the first guy, not a good guy, drug addict kind of guy. And, we gave him every opportunity, to just kind of be a good player. And, he was just misbehaving throughout his treatment. And finally, toward after treatment, when he was coming for a follow-up, he actually walked past all of the barriers. And you know where my office is? My office is off of the the corridor, where it's not near anything. And I'm pretty isolated out there. And he basically just, without asking anybody, he just came right to my office and he started threatening me. And it was scary because I felt very vulnerable, and I felt extraordinarily, what can I do? I mean, he would have obviously, I could defend myself, but he was a tough guy, and he was, strong, and he was young, and he was motivated. So I don't know what I did. Our good Lord was able to probably put some love in my heart to be able to circumvent the situation. But he quickly, I think that day, got kicked out of the practice. Not only did he get kicked out of the practice, he got kicked out of the medical center. So he can't come back to Garnet at all. So that was the story number one. Story number two was actually a guy that I actually started very friendly with. Knew his family, took care of some of his family members, and he started doing very poorly. And he had some problems that were related to his cancer in the bone. And I referred him to the chief of service for that particular problem at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. So I didn't send him, to the University of South Detroit. I sent him to Columbia, and whatever he was not happy with, whether it was the care he got or whether it was like they didn't follow up with him or whatever, because then he ran into trouble and had to go to another medical center and get taken care of. And he subsequently passed away, but he would call me when we would talk to each other. He would start absolutely blaming me for his outcome. Like, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I sent him to the best orthopedic surgeon in New York, and he wasn't satisfied. And maybe they didn't do a great job, but how is that my fault? And then he would start threatening me, and he said, I think about seeing you, and I want to beat the shit out of you, and all these kind of things. And he got a really good, letter from us, asking him to please refrain from coming back to the practice. So category one, unsafe patients need to be discharged from your clinic. You need to be safe. There have been plenty of instances of physicians being killed and murdered by either patients that are mentally ill or patients that are disgruntled. You need to protect yourself. Number two is a little softer, and again, a hard thing to make a judge. You got to make a judgment call on whether these patients, some of them could be savable or not, but I call them the non-compliant patients. So there's two people that I want to talk about, both of whom are lovely, very, very good people. One of them suffers from mental illness. So a lot of the way he behaves and the way he doesn't get things done and the way he just gets things set up and then doesn't come in to fulfill his obligation is from his mental illness. So a lot of it is not his fault, but a lot of it is his fault. Even when patients have mental illness, it still is it is not their fault that they have mental illness, but it is their fault if they're not getting assistance for their mental illness. So unfortunately, this young lad had to get that letter because I just gave him every opportunity plus a 50, and it just didn't work out. The young woman that I had to dismiss was actually not following directions to the point where she wasn't returning phone calls, and she was ducking us, and she wasn't getting the testing done. And quite frankly, if a patient is not being compliant with your recommendations and they have a bad outcome, it's going to be your responsibility that they had a bad outcome. So unfortunately, I tried. We sent letters. She wouldn't return the letters. She wouldn't return the calls. Very sweet, wonderful person. Zero mental illness. Just, was, I guess, what did they say? They were walking to the beat of a different drummer, right? So that would be called the non-compliant patient. Then there's the weasel and the manipulator. I had a guy that he was actually a guy, listen to this. He was a guy who got kicked out of one of the practices and never really would say, yeah, I got kicked out. I have no idea why I got kicked out. Well, it's because you're a weasel. He tried suing 3 of their doctors. He was basically only interested in trying to sue people, and he tried to manipulate, and he tried to get letters and tried to get time off of work, and he did this and he did that. And again, this was in the days where I wasn't dismissing anybody, and he did finish his therapy. And like 2 weeks after he finished his therapy, what did I get in the mail? I got a record request from his attorney. So it was actually so predictable. And this weasel, gladly, we did such a great job. He was cured of his cancer, and the lawyer probably told him he didn't have a case, because I haven't heard from them in over 5 years. But that would be that. That's called the weasel and the manipulator. Angel, did you ever hear of the disease called Munchausen syndrome?
No, I have not.
So there's a group of people, and they're very mentally ill, and it's very sad, that actually get pleasure in having medical procedures performed on them, or having medical procedures performed by proxy, not on them, but maybe on a child. So for instance, I had a patient who basically would come in and have very vague abdominal complaints, and they had their radiation, they were cured of their cancer, and I would send them to GI. GI couldn't find anything, so they would go to a surgeon, and they would go to 10 surgeons until they found a surgeon that would cut them open and take out a piece of their body, whether it be a gallbladder or a piece of colon or whatever. And this went on for about 2 years, until I finally put it together and said, yeah, you know what? This patient has Munchausen's. This is not a good thing. And they really require, mental health resources. So that's the Munchausen patient. I have another young woman who I haven't dismissed, but she is always pushing me to have surgery, to have things done that are inappropriate. And luckily, I've been able to keep her in check. But I keep trying to tell her that sometimes if something's not indicated, you don't want to start trouble when there is no trouble. Because every time a doctor touches you, I say this to all of our patients all the time, when a doctor touches you, there's a chance that they could hurt you. So do everything you can to be conservative. Don't want to have surgery. Do everything possible not to have surgery, and only have surgery if you need to have surgery. And in the instance of Munchausen's by proxy, what happens is the patient's child, who they're complaining to the pediatrician that they're not sleeping or they're in significant pain and they need an operation, the pity and the sorrow that's given to them as the mother or the father of a sick child is something that psychologically, soothes them. So those patients you have to keep an eye out for.
Quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Would that also be in to a certain degree? It's almost reminds me of an hypochondriac.
It's a hypochondriac on crack. So
Gotcha.
it's a hypochondriac that not just goes to the doctor because they think they're dying. It's a hypochondriac that not only thinks or convinced that they have a problem, they make other people think it, and they'll find someone. They'll keep searching. Believe me, you keep looking for a doctor to do surgery on you, they're going to find a doctor who's going to do surgery on you.
Wow.
So it is sort of a hypochondriac, but it's far more serious.
Gotcha.
And problematic. Here's a no-brainer, right? The hostile patient. There's the angry patient, the unrealistic patient. So there's a patient I should have absolutely kicked out of the practice, but I didn't. And I'm saddened because they always, he's just made my life miserable. From the minute they walked in the door, they threatened to sue me from the minute I walked. As soon as I met them, I'm going to sue you. Well, why are you going to sue me? Well, if you don't take good care of my wife, I'm going to sue you. Well, your wife has incurable cancer. I'm happy to try to make her feel better, but I'm not going to cure her. Oh, she's curable. So all these red flags, it happened in a time in my career when I wasn't really, I wanted to save the world and I wasn't being appropriate. And that's the angry, hostile patient. Turn away immediately. The drug seeker, you could understand this one, right? The patients who are only there to get drugs. So I had a couple of patients. So the problem with radiation is radiation causes side effects, and you're obligated to take care of their pain needs. But when a person comes in with huge drug needs, for pain, and then you treat them and they're in pain, and you have to give them meds for their pain because you're the one who induced that pain, you have to be able to spot the person who is not going to be able to get off of the medications. You don't want to be stuck, in a situation that could be a problem for your license if you continue to have to prescribe opioids for patients when their issues related to your care are no longer operative. And there was one of the saddest things in my 35 years just happened recently. I call these the self-destructive patients. There was a young man who had head and neck cancer, who has head and neck cancer, married, has a little baby kid, baby daughter, and he ended up, having some side effects from his treatment. And halfway into the treatment, he decided to quit therapy and go do alternative care. And he was kind of a conspiracy theorist. We talked about that. He was basically, didn't believe in the medical system, believed he knew more than everyone else, believed that everyone was corrupt and wanted to make money. And it was so heartbreaking because every single person in the department, from the front desk, to the physicists, to the nurses, literally were crying when he stopped treatment, because we know he's not going to do well. And we know that his daughter is going to grow up without a father. And it was so heartbreaking. And it was heartbreaking to send him the letter. But unfortunately, he made the decision that he wasn't going to follow direction. And we didn't want to be responsible, for that, for that decision. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about something that thankfully I haven't really met in my career. That's called the flirt. So there are patients who, might not be all there upstairs, might have some mental illness, and, they project and they fall in love with their caretaker, whether it be their doctor or their nurse or whatever, and they feel that they have a romantic relationship with their unrealistic romantic relationship, when indeed that's not the case. So that's another red flag. So Angel, if you don't mind me wrapping it up, I'll just say the following. If you're happy with your team, as I said, you found the great team that you deserve, why would you ever want the embarrassment and the inconvenience of getting kicked out of the practice? And believe me, it will follow you. If you get kicked out of a practice, and when your other doctors that you then go to see in place of the doctors that kicked you out of the practice, they're going to get your records. They're going to know you got kicked out of that practice. This is going to stigmatize you. It's going to be like an albatross around your neck. If you like the people and you trust them and they're taking good care of you, do everything possible not to be that guy or that gal that does something silly and and really unnecessary to get yourself kicked out. You need to recognize that being a survivor thriver will gain you a tremendous amount of goodwill. And believe me, especially in the oncology environment and in the oncology world, it is filled with people like all of the people, great people that I work with every day, who know what you're going through. Now the word is going to be what comes next, the word but. But you do need to recognize that your medical relationship with your cancer team is a sacred bond. It's an intimate dance. It's an unbreakable vow. It's a bona fide contract that requires respect and consideration for your doctors and your nurses. It requires your obligation to do your part in your journey for healing and cure. And it's so simple. Common courtesy. If you miss an appointment or you're going to be late, just pick up the phone and call the office. They will understand. And if they don't, you don't want to be there anyway. Number 2, take responsibility. Be accountable for your behavior and your actions. We, as your medical team, are accountable for excellence in caring for you. You have to be accountable to be an excellent patient. Attitude, attitude, attitude. Make sure you come to your clinic with the proper attitude. Not that everyone's trying to make money from you, not that anyone is trying to give you treatments that are unnecessary, not that people are trying to kill you, but people are trying to help you. Instead of coming in with a dour, negative attitude, come in with a very bright and positive attitude. Number 4, compliance, compliance, compliance. If your doctors are recommending something, you can absolutely have a conversation with them. You can have a discussion with them. You could have a disagreement with them. You could ask them to prove to you, where is the data that supports that I need this or that I need this scan, or that I need this surgery. It is completely healthy And we do this on a weekly basis to tell you guys that you do have that opportunity. It is your right to communicate with your doctor and feel comfortable and know everything. So when you just kind of listen and we tell you what to do and you don't ask questions, you know in your head you're not going to do it, you're being what's called passive aggressive. That's not going to be the type of attitude that's going to make you a successful patient in any practice. Forget about my practice or Angel's practice, in anybody's practice. Complementary medicine is fine. Any doctor that tries to put you down for the belief in the body's ability to heal itself or in the naturopathic world of things and remedies and beautiful naturopathic plants and modalities, or Reiki and massage and healing and drum banging or whatever it is that you want to do, is completely fine if it's done in conjunction and with the approval of your oncology team. But not if it goes against the standard of care, not if you're excluding the standard of care in favor, like that poor young man that's not going to do well, then that's where you have to draw the line. And you are not responsible for your mental health situation. I want to emphasize that tonight, but you are responsible to take care of it. Angel Santana, a very controversial podcast tonight. A podcast that I never thought I would ever hear myself say, but I think an important podcast, and I think a podcast that is very provoking and will generate, I hope, a good buzz.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, I think when it's all said and done, speaking from the patient's perspective, we have to understand that doctors are human. Doctors, regardless of their PhD and regardless of the amount of work that they have put into to become who they are, they're there for you. And we have to learn and understand that even though things may not fall in the category or in the results that we want them to, their job is not to give you something that's the opposite. It is something for the positive. And when you work with your doctor and your doctor is able to work with you, you have to be in the positive atmosphere, even if the negative outcome becomes negative. But at the end of the day, if you think positive and you add positive times positive, you will get positivity.
Angel Santana, thank you very much for your comments and your keen insights as always. And to the board of directors, thank you for all of your sacrifice for our survivor thrivers. I really want to just take a moment in closing just to say that, yes, we did discuss options for being dismissed from a practice, but I think that you guys would all agree there are reasons that are very bona fide, reasons that are very reasonable, and reasons that are going to be in everyone's best interest. Never forget that we always have your back as far as being survivor thrivers, and we know what you're going through. And I'm hopeful that this podcast will alert you to certain things or certain thought processes that you might have about your care team, and might maybe set you on a path where you could be saved and you could salvage that relationship with your trusted care team. And I'd like to end this podcast as I end every podcast with a blessing. And that blessing is sincere and legitimate and genuine. And that's by wishing you all of our wonderful, beautiful cancer survivor thrivers, a very long, healthy, happy, and cancer-free life. God bless you. God be with you. Peace.